Hello, and welcome to SENsational, the special educational needs podcast brought to you by Witherslack Group. My name's Laura, I'm a senior occupational therapist for Group, and we have SEN schools all over the country and support almost 2,000 young people and their families every day. More importantly, I'm a mum of 2 children, one of whom is neurodivergent, and I'm here to host our monthly podcast where I'll be asking our special guests the questions that you and I want the answers to. Whether you're a parent, carer, grandparent or professional, our advice, guidance and practical strategies for you to try at home will enable you to empower your children and your young people. Our regular listeners might be able to tell we've had a bit of a makeover. So for those listening, you can now watch our episodes on YouTube. We really want you to be involved and have your questions answered. So please find us on Instagram and Facebook by searching Witherslack Group or submit your questions via email. A new episode of SENsational will be released on the first Monday of every month, and it'll be available on all podcast streaming services and YouTube. So sit back, relax and enjoy this episode. And if you like what you hear, hit like and subscribe. Today, our podcast is about understanding ARFID, and I'm joined today by Nicole Kirkland and Emma Taylor from ARFID Awareness. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
Shall we start by finding out a little bit about you and what you do? Nicole, who would like to start with you?
Sure. My name's Nicole Kirkland. I'm one of the co-founders of ARFID Awareness. ARFID Awareness is a charity that we established about 5 years ago now, actually. Time flies. It was 2019. And my co-founder and I, Stacey Lambert, set the charity up in response to our own personal circumstance and having loved ones that had received diagnosis of ARFID, but also because we recognized that there was absolutely nothing out there that was offering parents and carers any sort of information or support, but also healthcare professionals. There was no sort of professional body that people could turn to for information and advice.
Mm-hmm. And Emma, how about yourself?
So my name's Emma Taylor. I head up the Parent and Carer Committee. I've just started to do that for ARFID Awareness UK. I'm also a parent of a child with ARFID, and I found the charity back in 2022 when I was in exactly that position. Mm-hmm. There was no information for parents or carers, and I had a 2-year-old that was really struggling with food, and got in touch with these guys and took it from there.
Oh, thanks for that little bit of background. It really helps our listeners to understand where we're coming from today. So ARFID, which is Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder, can you tell us a little bit about what that is as a diagnosis, please?
Yeah, ARFID is a feeding and eating disorder. Feeding because it can affect children and be diagnosed as early as 3. It absolutely can affect children younger than that. Mm-hmm. And it is a recognized feeding and eating disorder. It entered something called the DSM-5 in 2013, which stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And that's basically, if you like, sort of the encyclopedia of psychiatric disorders. It also entered the ICD-10, which is the European equivalent. And it is an eating disorder and feeding disorder that is characterized by, I guess in layman's terms, almost a fear of food or a fear of eating, if you like. And we now know that there are sort of different subtypes of ARFID, but it is essentially an avoidance of specific food groups entirely, and a very, very limited diet. The jury's out on how many that is, and there is no set number, but it's usually sort of no more than 15 to 20.
And can you tell us, how does it differ from any other eating disorders that might be in those diagnostic manuals that you mentioned?
It's a really good question. Unlike anorexia, and this is where it tends to have a lot of confusion, ARFID does not come with any sort of worries about weight gain, around body image. So quite often it's even the opposite. Often people with ARFID, and I say people, it's something that can affect children, infants as well as adults, but it's primarily children and adolescents, and they often really want to eat, and actually what they feel is a real struggle not to be able to consume either sometimes the volume, the quantity of food they'd like to eat, or the types.
Okay. And if we're thinking about diagnosing ARFID, what is the process for diagnosing ARFID in the UK? And are there any other eating differences that might also be considered on that journey?
Absolutely. And I'll let Emma talk a little bit more about autistic eating, but I think the diagnostic process is a bit of a postcode lottery, unfortunately, in the UK. There's no doubt about that. And it depends where you live. ARFID is best diagnosed by a multidisciplinary team. So by that, we mean a pediatrician, a speech and language therapist, an occupational therapist, and a clinical psychologist. And that's because it's really important to make sure that there's nothing else impeding the feeding and eating process, such as swallowing difficulties. So once those have been ruled out, then, a dietitian, sorry, I forgot to mention, how could I do that? A dietitian. But ARFID is then diagnosed by a clinical psychologist who's able to determine once those other things have been ruled out that yes, there's enough sort of impact on psychosocial functioning that ARFID is the diagnosis.
And did you mention autistic eating? Was that something that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, I mean, there is a crossover, and what parents, certainly that I speak to, struggle with is when going through the diagnostic process for ARFID is sort of autistic eating is seen as fairly normal. And actually, you know, it's very hard to describe, but ARFID is much more severe than this. You know, a child with ARFID can starve themselves to death, and that's not going to happen from a child with autistic eating. So there is a difference, and I think a lot of parents and carers definitely struggle when faced with healthcare professionals to explain the difference and the severity.
Okay. And when we're talking about autistic eating, are these children perhaps who struggle with the different textures of food, maybe the eating environment, maybe the skills to eat, like maybe the fine motor skills, where ARFID is perhaps different because, like you said, it is so severe and rooted in that anxiety that food is just completely
there definitely
avoided.
is some crossover.
Yeah.
So certainly in my son's case, ARFID is very much sensory based as well as fear.
Okay.
And there are subtypes to ARFID, as Nicole touched on. One of those is sensory, one of those is fear. But certainly children with autistic spectrum conditions do have that crossover because they generally often do have sensory factors that affect their eating. It's sort of more about the severity and the effect on their health. Okay. Children with ARFID, the effect on their health can be really catastrophic.
Can you tell me a little bit about how important early intervention is then around ARFID, please?
That's another really good question you're throwing at all of us. I think there's different ways to look at the value of intervention and a diagnosis. And people often will say to us, do I need to have a diagnosis? No, you don't. Just in the same way, you don't have to have a diagnosis for autism, but we find, it can be really helpful to understand why somebody is the way they are and to explain it to family members and loved ones. I think where the real value in early intervention or an early diagnosis comes in is understanding how best to manage ARFID and eating. And that means making sure that the individual is being catered to in the best way for their individual needs. And that could mean, eating in front of a screen. If it lowers anxiety, it could mean having access to their preferred or their safe foods whenever they want. So I guess the sooner somebody understands and has a diagnosis, then the sooner measures can be put in place to lower the anxiety and to make the relationship with food and eating much more pleasant.
Oh, thanks for that. Yeah, really important. I'll just take a little bit of a break here to switch from my questions to some questions that have been sent in from our parents who were aware that we were doing a podcast to think about ARFID and to get that understood a little bit more. So some questions from our parents, starting with, my son has always struggled with food textures and has been a picky eater since a young age. He's now 6 and will pretty much eat only chicken dippers or toast. He can gag or be sick after any type of vegetable. Would you say this is ARFID?
It's a really hard one because we're not medical professionals and we can't diagnose ARFID, but the symptoms and that you're describing there very much fit with ARFID. Gagging, retching at foods, we see that all of the time. So yes, absolutely. I mean, the advice would be, if you're really concerned, to try and go and get help, go and speak to your GP, try and get a referral to a dietitian. Certainly in my case and lots of cases, I'm sure Nicole will confirm, a dietitian is invaluable.
Yeah.
Even without a diagnosis, they can give you help, support, advice. So certainly a referral to dietitian I'd be asking for.
Fabulous. And is there any information, any diaries or anything that families can keep to take extra information to those appointments, or just go in and saying, I've got these real worries, can you help me? Is that enough?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I did receive a very early diagnosis for my child, which is completely against the norm. And I'm very, I count myself lucky to have that. But I did receive good advice. So I took my child to be weighed by a health professional every 2 weeks for a period of about 8 months.
Okay.
So we had those on record. I was in regular contact with the healthcare professionals, my health visitor at the time, because Oliver was only 2 then. So certainly, talking about it all the time, keep going back, don't give up. Get those weights if you can. I mean, weight doesn't always correlate to ARFID at all, but in our case it did. So if you are worried about your child because they are losing weight or not gaining weight or growing as they should, certainly that can be helpful in certainly getting in front of that dietitian.
Oh, that's really helpful advice. Thank you. So our next question is, I feel like I've tried everything to get my little boy interested in food. Food shops, meal prepping, calming music at meal times and no screen time when they're eating. But no matter what I try, he's not interested. He's awfully thin and I'm so worried that he's going to start to impact his mental health as he grows up. Not to mention the lack of nutrition, which is already taking a toll on his energy levels and mood outbursts. Any advice, please?
Absolutely. I think it sounds like this parent is trying everything he or she can. And I think Emma and I can relate. We've been there. I think the most important thing to understand is where ARFID is concerned, what's really important is to lower anxiety levels. So anything that's going to make the child feel comfortable is going to pave the way for the best chance of success. So actually, screens are often really, really helpful, and because they are a distraction. Okay. And so we would say, and medical professionals would say, let them eat in front of the TV. And I think one of the hardest things that I know myself and my husband have had to do as parents is actually sort of throw that rule book out the window. We kind of came into parenthood. I don't know if you were the same, Emma, but thinking that, we would sit down as a family and have meals together and there wouldn't be screen time. And, we were going to serve our child organic fruits and vegetables. And actually, one of the biggest learnings for us on our ARFID journey is that we actually have to put those things aside. And so our daughter eats in front of the TV. She eats in a separate room for us. But that means it allows her to take in a volume of food that she requires. And ultimately, it's about protecting growth. So as long as she's doing that, then the screens can stay. So I guess to summarize really, is just throw that rule book out the window, go with what her son needs, and hopefully she'll find that in time, by doing that, once his stress and his anxiety levels are reduced, he feels more able to move on and to want to try some new foods.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Definitely take the pressure off as much as possible. I think we feel so much pressure to feed our children. Yeah. They then feel that pressure. And we're just adding more and more pressure around eating. So for me, definitely as much pressure as can be taken off. That was something I learned quite late along our journey to a diagnosis, and, made mistakes along the way of really pressurizing my son to eat, and actually, that was counterproductive completely. So, but I know you did say that she was concerned about him being pale, tired, etc. Definitely go and seek help from from the GP, from a medical professional. Definitely go and speak about it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the kind of take home message there, is really try and get that medical support as early as possible to kind of start on that journey towards diagnosis if that's where you're heading. Yeah,
especially where nutritional concerns. Especially where there are nutritional concerns, and this is where dietitians are really invaluable, because they'll do blood work, they'll check iron, vitamin, mineral levels, and then work with a parent to find a suitable supplement, if possible, to help fill those gaps if there are any.
Mm-hmm. So know that help is there, and just that as soon as you can start to seek that early and get on that pathway early, the better for your child, really.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. So we're going to talk a little bit more about neurological conditions connected to ARFID. As we know, a lot of autistic children experience ARFID, like we just talked earlier about autistic eating. How does ARFID intersect with autism?
So actually, there are some stats in that around 40% of autistic people have an eating disorder of some sort. And ARFID is typically one of those that they're affected by. My son is autistic, he's nonverbal. And, as we talked about the crossover before, the sensory factors really are a crossover between the two. There's a lot of sensory crossover there, crunchy food, soft food, there's lots of textures. We're using a lot of our senses around eating. There's actually 32 steps to eating. Yeah. Not that everyone would know that. It's not a very simple thing that you just pick up food and put it in your mouth as it feels to us. And a lot of that is sensory. There is the touch, there is the taste, there is the smell, sounds of food. My son struggles with all of those things. And so there is definitely a crossover to the fact that he also struggles with sound in an environment related to his ASD. So where food isn't involved, certainly one of the factors that my son struggles with is loud noises, sudden noises, and certainly hearing people eat. So it is a crossover, definitely.
Nicole, have you anything to kind of add there?
No, I think Emma summarised it all really, really well.
Fabulous. Great. Okay. So what are the main challenges faced by autistic children when it comes to food and eating? You were talking there about some of the sensory challenges. Yeah,
I mean, with school is a huge factor. And that is something I've just been through a process of an EHCP for my son who's due to start reception in September.
That's an education, health and care plan.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And certainly what I received on my first draft was an education plan. And actually what it should be is an education, health and care plan. And actually I say in the order of health care followed by education. Okay. And certainly what we find is ARFID is not very well covered in these plans, and our children really struggle at school. School is a place where there is food. It's unavoidable for them unless there is something written into that plan. That was certainly, something that I had to go sort of quite through a long haul with to get my son's plan to be correct around his ARFID needs. And parents really need to sort of shout out, ask for health professionals to support them. Certainly the first report about my son's ARFID was very factual. He has ARFID, he is fed by a tube, this. Well, that actually isn't telling anybody anything. That isn't giving any advice to education or to the local authority. So I got back in touch with that team and explained the process to them. And they actually wrote a much more holistic report, which went into Oliver's plan. And now I feel really confident in that plan for him going to school.
The strategies and provisions
he needs are there. So certainly, one thing our children definitely struggle with is school. And certainly I would hope that, any parents listening that are in that same boat, really advocate for your child around that ARFID, because if you have got that situation, it really does need to go in the plan.
Thank you for that. Just thinking about how we're helping and supporting the young people maybe after diagnosis, what are some of the strategies and therapies that can help children with ARFID?
Take the pressure off. I mean, I think that's the one thing, the one message I'd really sort of like to communicate on this, which is there is no formula for success with ARFID. ARFID is a spectrum, and there's varying degrees of it. And the most important thing that parents, carers can do is just create an environment where the child or young person, even adult, feels safe and secure. That's, there is some research that shows that work around reducing sensory sensitivities can be effective for some. For some individuals, CBT therapy is shown to be helpful again in reducing anxiety and helping people process and be able to try new foods and expand their food group. But I suppose the slightly scary thing is there is, like I said, there is no formula. There is no one size fits all. It's a new area, as we said. Research is underway, and there's a lot more to come. So it's something that we're still learning a lot about. So really, I suppose it's a little bit of guess and test, and every family, every individual is unique, and it's finding the right thing that works for you.
Yeah. And I suppose that's where you touched on earlier, having the multidisciplinary team there to help with assessment should, I would imagine, help with you to take home some advice after diagnosis so that you're hearing those professional voices and how you can take those messages into your home to help your child?
Absolutely. And actually, the other thing I should say is really important is speaking to other parents.
Yeah.
I know for myself, because there is a lack of sort of care pathways out there at the moment within the NHS, I think it's fair to say most of us feel very much on our own in terms of figuring our own way out. And that's where being, part of an online support group has proven, I think, invaluable. I don't want to speak for you, Emma, but
absolutely.
I mean, that's how we met. That's how Stacey and I met. It's been invaluable for sort of equipping, I can say, me and my family with the tools we need, the support, the validation that what we're doing is the right thing to be doing, and just to not feel so alone on that journey as we all sort of try and figure our way through it together.
Yeah, it's a very lonely place to be. And I remember, I had this very young child, and, your job as a mum is to feed your child. And I couldn't do that. And it was such an emotional time. I was, extremely upset all of the time, struggling. I felt like I was failing. And I found the support groups, reached out to the charity, spoke to lots of other parents. Even last night I was talking to another mum who was sort of a year behind me on the journey, and speaking to her. And we are there. There's lots of us. It's a big community, and we are there for each other. But, like Nicole says, until we have proper multidisciplinary teams available and proper care pathways in every postcode, we have to do the best we can. And generally the best is speaking to each other at the moment.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing those stories today, because I know that's really personal and it can be quite difficult to talk, about such emotional subjects. I really appreciate you sharing those stories today. I just wonder, we've talked very much about taking the pressure off and reducing that anxiety. Do you have any words of wisdom or any take-home messages for the people listening today who might be thinking that their child has ARFID, or they're thinking about taking those first steps into a diagnosis?
Go first? Yeah,
go for it.
For me, it's all food is good food. And that is a statement that I think changed my life, if I'm honest. And that's a really big thing to say. And it was the words that a dietitian said to me around the time that my daughter was getting diagnosed, and she was about 3.5. And I was sitting in her office, and she said to me, because it was Halloween sort of around the corner, and she said, is your daughter going to go out trick-or-treating? And I said, yep. And she said, great. She said, are you going to let her eat all her sweets? And I said, yeah, if she wants to. And she said, perfect. Okay. And she said, all food is good food. If she wants to come home and eat the whole bag in one go, let her do it. Where ARFID is concerned, nothing should be off the table. And it's a mantra that I repeat to myself, sometimes, on a weekly basis. I'm still reminding myself with it because, again, I think, it's natural for us as parents. You want to do the best for your child, to sort of be worried about what they're consuming. What is their nutritional intake? And I have to catch myself and correct some old behaviors that, I grew up with. And friends of mine will sometimes joke and say, God, you're so much fun to hang out with because you can always justify anything. If, there's a slice of cake and I'm like, actually, that's good. It's got eggs in it and it's got flour in it. It's a source of milk, some protein. So we do sort of have a bit of a laugh about that, but it really is true. All food is good food. And as long as you're protecting growth and nutrition, nothing should be discounted.
Oh, thank you. Emma, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of similar to what we were saying before, don't suffer in silence. Don't be on your own with this. If you're a parent struggling with this, reach out. There are lots of us in this community that will take the time to talk to you, try and help as best as we can. One thing I'd say, a similar to line to Nicole, and that she says, all food is good food. It's not that our children won't eat. They can't eat.
No, yeah.
And as parents, you've got to stop being so hard on yourself here because they can't eat. It's not that they won't. It's nothing you've done. You're not to blame. And reach out, get some support. If there's nothing forthcoming from your health services in the area, there is definitely value in what other parents can help you with.
I am so certain that our listeners today have got so much from this podcast today. So genuinely, really thank you so much for joining us today. And will our listeners be able to get some of the information from a website? Do you have a website?
Yeah, absolutely. So the website is www.arfidawarenessuk.org. There is a page on the website dedicated to resources. It's a tab called Resources. And if people click on that, they will find a variety of information leaflets, booklets that they can download, then email to friends, carers, schools, even pass on to their healthcare professional who might not have heard of ARFID themselves. So hopefully there is a variety on there designed to help people make that journey a bit easier.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of SENsational today. If you like what you've heard, please click like and subscribe. And I hope to see you again on another episode of SENsational.